Hello, and welcome to Dream Cinema. For the past 5 years, the Step Jayne album Silver Bullet Suicide has been released one track at a time with an accompanying video. For the next 10 months in Dream Cinema, I will be exploring each track and video with a co-host. This month, I will be discussing Psalm Zero, the album's first track, with Dr. Darin Gould. Darin is a psychiatrist with 20 years of experience treating adult, child, and adolescent clients in private practice as well as in acute care facilities. Darin is also an author and an avid banjo player. It should be noted that Darin and I were in grade school together many moons ago, and it has been a pleasure to get to know him as an adult. Prior to our conversation, we invite you to watch the music video for Psalm Zero. We look forward to seeing you there. Dr. Gould, it's wonderful to meet with you this morning.
JD, this is amazing. But, I actually feel most comfortable if you just call me Darin.
Oh, okay.
I always like to joke that I'm not your doctor.
Well, if I need a psychiatrist, I know where to go.
You're always welcome.
Will you let me call you doctor if I need your services?
If you needed to, absolutely.
Okay, all right, good, wonderful. So let's start there. You're a psychiatrist. You've been practicing for how many years?
It's over 20 years that I've been a psychiatrist, and I really found it interesting that you wanted a psychiatrist to be on your program, because I think sometimes people that may not know your journey and come across your art might think, this guy needs a psychiatrist. Do you ever get that?
I've never been directly told psychiatry is what I need. I've been referred to as the crazy guy. So okay, I guess it's in the ballpark there. It depends who's asking the question and who's offering the admonition to seek help. I tend to look at their level of sanity before I succumb to their advice.
It's interesting that you say that, because I have followed kind of Step Jayne's music and videos intermittently, and then fairly recently, you and I kind of got in contact again, and we were just like having these great conversations.
Right.
And the imagery and the words that Step Jayne's music generates, as you have hinted at, generates intense experience. And you talk about, crazy people and looking at the source of who's judging. And, like this song that we're going to be looking at, Psalm Zero, I love how the images that we tend to hold dear as like, this is society, this is what we need to maintain. You like to blow things up and look at the inside, and that can be terrifying. And so maybe having a psychiatrist to go along the journey just to help with the anxiety management is probably a good idea, huh?
Well, it seems that as I've shared my work through the years, my acquaintances, friends, people I don't know who happen to engage with the work, often are in the field of counseling, psychology, psychiatry. I just had somebody purchase a number of my paintings, and she's a psychiatrist.
How about that?
So I think it's because people like you who go into the field have an interest in the inner workings of the human mind, maybe the spirit. I'm sure we're going to get into some language in a bit where we're going to run out of words perhaps to describe certain things. But there seems to be an interest in the field that you're in for my work. And so I'm just pleased by that, to tell you the truth. It makes me happy.
So that was a question that I wanted to get your answer on, which is when you created the specific piece Psalm Zero, who was your intended audience, or who did you imagine would be engaging with this work?
You know, I didn't. I got, I, yeah, it, the first line came to me, you know, and it's kind of a interesting way to start an album.
That is a great way to put it, because the feel that I get with most of your work is kind of the same feel I get when I come across a really complex automobile accident and you slow down and you start to ask, like, what happened here? And you're trying to figure it out. And then, eventually you're kind of forced to go on by, but it sticks with you.
Mm, mm,
So where did this opening line come from? Like, what was the situation you were in that just like,
yeah.
this is how we're going to start this?
Well, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, possibly 7 years ago, because I've been releasing this album one track at a time with an accompanying music video. So it's taken me to do what I want to do. It's taken me about 5 years to release the album. I'm down to the last video, and it's a 10-track album.
That's an awesome feat, man.
Yeah, it's been quite the experience, and it's been an investigation, and it's been also a reinterpretation, because you never create it the same way twice. When you're interpreting it with images, you're giving it a different excuse me, you're giving it a different place to live,
Mm.
and you're giving it possibly a jaded interpretation, which is kind of unfortunate and fortunate at the same time. So when this line came to me, um, it just it just came into my mind, and I just sort of was imagining this this open white room with a being in there. So I guess if there was an intended audience at all, it was this being I was speaking with
Mm.
in this white room,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of corresponds with like a dreamlike vision I had about these creatures that were they were essentially transparent creatures moving up an escalator into an upper room where they were all gathered. So it harkens back to that sort of vision, but it takes on more of an innocence than
Mm-hmm.
that vision was more to do with the future, and kind of like where we might be going as humans in the future in our evolution.
So when you create something, do you ever find that the words and the images that you had originally intended as 3, 4, 5 years goes by, you look back on it, you view it again, and all of a sudden, either you don't know what you originally intended or it means something completely different to you now?
Oh yeah. I mean, you go through things in life. You go through traumas at certain times. You go through experience joy. Certain pleasures at one point of your life are different than they are now, you know. And so you can't help but feel something new. And honestly, sometimes I don't even want to listen to some of my old songs or watch some of the videos for a while. I have to just put them away, because that's over now. That's what I went through, and it's sometimes it could be painful, for instance, and you don't want to experience it again. Right now, I'm doing a documentary on my dad and mom, and I'm watching footage from interviews that I've done over the last few years. And so I'm reliving my dad's death and his life over and over and over. And it's quite the experience, I've got to say. Um, and, I'm in the middle of it, so I can't comment on it
No, yeah, I get it.
fully, but other than to say, um, it does something to a person to spend time with something over time. You can't negate the influence of repetition and time on our experience and what that does for us.
But let's bring that theme of death into Psalm Zero, because
Mm-hmm.
to me that is weaved throughout this song. In fact, the end of the song is all about dissolution and clearly, this image of this mature man at the beginning appears right at the end. And to me, the whole thing has kind of a Jewish wisdom literature kind of chiastic feel to it. You know what I mean? Where
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everything kind of comes together in the middle. You have these powerful images that to me evoke so many different things, but you have this image that I see and compare to like the Greek dilemma. You have the two horns of the dilemma. In the crux of this dilemma, you have this icon. Is it, what is it? We don't know, but it's like being challenged, it's being destroyed, it's being renewed. And
you're talking about the image
yeah,
in the middle of the V of the mountain there. That
right,
okay,
right,
yeah, mm-hmm.
yeah. And to me, that's kind of where all this kind of comes together. And um, I I mean, to me, I have to interpret this based on things that I've been reading and experiencing. And I think many people, you're my age, have experienced intense deconstruction of their world. And it's not just our generation, but, icons that used to like be really important. We look at them now and they may have lost all meaning. Um, and there is this kind of question of like meaning, like we as human beings have to have meaning, and yet the world as we look at it inherently doesn't seem to have any meaning. We have meaning making systems, but those are the ones that have been deconstructed, and then in the end you die. So to me, this piece is an awesome like snapshot of the human condition.
And I would only suggest that everything that you just posited is possibly also a construction.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, here's another question, is that in your work, it's very clear that you're trying to convey experiences that are beyond literature, that are beyond words, that are very profound to you. But so what is it that you have seen? Now, this is a hard thing because I'm asking you to describe things that can't be described by words, that you've spent years creating this album to convey. But if you can try to get at what is it that you've seen that you want other people to see through your work?
I do share the work.
I understand.
And I do want to share the work. That is part of the cycle that it has to go through, because otherwise it's like an ectopic pond that just dries up and rots, and I don't want to do that. I want to complete the cycle, and our conversation here is the final completion of the cycle, because then I get to have a conversation and re-experience it through you and through us in this space. So anything that you experience through the art is right and is appreciated. Everything that you've said about your experience with the deconstruction and everything like that, going back to Judaistic interpretations and things like that. I was thinking about it, our conversation, and about Psalm 0, and then I was sort of relating it to Ecclesiastes, the Hebrew texts, one of the Hebrew texts. And in Ecclesiastes it says there's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to dance, and a time to mourn. For some reason that came to mind as I was thinking about the lyrics of Psalm 0, even though in that there is a time for everything, and this is being deconstructed, there seems to be some sort of a tie-in between the two ideas, for me anyway. So to answer your question, whatever you experience is correct and is what I hope for.
Yeah.
If you go to a space, then I did my job. But I think it takes time with a piece of art to go to the places where you possibly can go. Like a friend of mine just posted a Chopin piano piece he's working on. He's been working on one phrase for a month, like not a phrase, but like about a 2-minute portion of Chopin. And he's been doing it every day for a month. And he's discovering new things every day. Well, who takes time for that, right? Especially in our world now, who takes time to sink in? And it's okay. It's what we're evolving into, I guess. We're evolving into snapshots and very quick, rapid fire images and sounds, not to mention advertising. So
So, to sink into a piece of art, like it sounds like you have with Psalm Zero, is a different way of being with something.
Yeah, I like that. You know, it reminds me, I've been trying to give myself the education that I wish that I'd had. And that's not speaking against any teachers or uh, institutions of education, because I felt like I had a great education. It's just there's so much to learn and so little time. So one of the things that I read was Martin Buber's I and Thou. And Martin Buber was kind of a Jewish Hasidic uh, philosopher. And his book is dense and difficult. And when he lectured on it, he would often say, I don't remember what I was trying to get at when
Mm,
he
mm,
had written something.
mm,
But the idea is that where God lives is in that in between space, in
mm,
relationship,
mm,
and that we can have a very profound um, I and thou. He later on renamed the book I and You because he said thou was a little bit dated,
mhm.
as opposed to, I and it. And when I am hearing about someone who's spending time uh, really exploring a piece of Chopin's music, or I'm listening to and watching the video of like Psalm Zero, to me, like you just referenced, there is this kind of dialogue that starts up that is different than your normal everyday sort of life. And I think it's really awesome what you're getting at, which is your audience has severe ADHD from culture. We are flashed images all the time. Our thumbs pass by things rapidly, and your stuff is not easy listening. It doesn't just hang in the background. It like demands something of the listener, either to violently shut it off because it's too much, or to just go on a journey.
Well, there's so much to say on everything that you've just commented. The first part of what you said reminded me of a thought I had the other morning when I was sitting in the sun doing my morning quiet time. And I began to do sort of a typical request of the universe. And I stopped. And I felt like whatever it is, St. John of the Cross calls it nada, which means of nothing, because he came to that point where you can't name it. Uh, we'll go on and talk about that a little more maybe, but the whatever it was, I had the impression come to me, um, let's have a relationship. Let's have a relationship. And in a relationship, and maybe I'm anthropomorphizing um, everything here, but in a typical human relationship, if all you do is ask of your partner something every time you talk or I mean, how long is that going to last? What kind of a relationship is that? It's a caregiver, patient type of relationship rather than some sort of a relationship with a lover. I mean, St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, they had these relationships with God that were ecstatic and almost like a lover. That's how they imagined it. And so when I was there the other morning, I thought, let's just be together. Let's just be in the sun. Let's just sit here and hold hands, rather than have me go down my Santa Claus list of immature, childish perceptions. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what kind of struck me when you were talking in the first part of of what you were saying about relationship. What's our relationship to whatever this is?
Yeah. That's really beautiful. So,
Yeah, yeah.
one of the things that I had a question about is your life is unconventional from my perspective. Mm-hmm. And
depends who you hang out with, by the way.
No, I totally get that. I totally get that. Like, probably, you have a tribe who would all consider, yourselves like normal and everybody else is completely crazy. And you may be right. Like, sometimes I feel like this conventional life that I live that has a lot of clocks and alarms and things is mad in the insane sense of it.
Well, you may be surprised at how conventional I actually am. I have check boxes and routines and algorithms that I've developed in order to give myself a box in which to create.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to. That's just my nature. And then from there you can float out into the ether, knowing you can come back to this sandbox that is sort of defined.
Yeah.
And I like to check boxes at the end of the day. But
Feels
anyway,
good.
sorry, I just wanted to interject that, but I think you were going somewhere.
Well, it's just the question of, from the outside
Mm-hmm.
looking in,
Mm-hmm.
the images that you create
Mm-hmm.
are very unconventional.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my question. Do you see yourself as unconventional? And it sounds like in some ways you see yourself as very conventional. And
well, yeah, I mean, I do. I think about this a lot, especially these days with the political environment we're living in, where you have to kind of choose a team to define yourself with, and you have to act a certain way, dress a certain way, do this or that in certain ways in order to be part of the team or the tribe. And I think it's unfortunate because we're nuanced creatures. We are at times very conventional and conservative, and at other times we may be super liberal. And you see it within the same people. You see the same dynamics within one person. Maybe in a given day you choose conservative, then liberal the next hour. It depends. And in politics, we're never given necessarily even what the issue is we're talking about. We're told that this guy over here's son did this, and this guy said this about this person, and it's never about what the issue is. So we never even know if we're conservative or liberal. You know what I mean? And as far as the images that I create, I mean, I see quite a bit of art, and what I look at, Thelonious Bosch, I can't remember his first name right now. He painted heaven and hell, paradise and hell. I mean, this was like, I don't know how long ago. I think it was 1500s.
Yeah, he was English, I think.
Yeah, I believe so. And so, I mean, his images are intense. He's painting within the structures of heaven and hell within a conventional, either Catholic or, Protestant setting. But he's creating these, I mean, disturbing creatures, and so is he conservative? Is he liberal? What is he? I don't know, and I don't really care necessarily. I just want to experience what Bosch has laid out there for me, even if it's disturbing. Now maybe I can only look at his painting for 20 minutes or less, before I'm exhausted.
Yeah. No, I really like that because, it takes a certain level of dedication and energy to, really sink into like Psalm 0. And maybe in the same way that, some people in our world scare us or confuse us, that maybe we can look at them more like a piece of art that we're supposed to experience rather than, we're not destroying your work. We don't come with clubs and try to, bash it and put it in its place and say that this is ruining society or whatever. Because certainly,
well, some people do, I'm sure, think that. People maybe from my past who were part of the organization that you and I were both part of. Maybe they have thoughts like that. And
they do, JD. I'm from your past too, and I talk to people. But you know what I say? I say, I encourage you to not write JD off because he is a little scary sometimes, because he's doing something quite profound. And when I talk to him on the telephone, he's the same JD that we have always known, but he's gone on some really cool journeys.
Well, thank you. I mean, I understand. My own mother and father, I mean, they had trouble, with what some of the things that I've created, because it's, if you haven't experienced it visually or in an auditory way, or maybe it can set you off. But I will say this. People have dark thoughts. People have dark foreboding thoughts that they do not address.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be the most conventional looking gentleman walking the streets of a conservative town. And if you were to crawl inside that person's brain and see what that person is dealing with, it would scare the hell out of us, perhaps, And so people are depressed, people are suicidal, people are possibly even homicidal, and there's this thing called duende, which is a Spanish word for a little creature, but the poet Lorca kind of retooled it into, it's like a dark creative force that comes through the artist. And his suggestion is that you attend to it before it attends to you.
Mm.
And so my thought is something is rolling through me, something is coming through here. I want to address it. I want to take a look at it. Okay. If it's eroticism, I want to take a look at it. If it's a dissolution of beliefs, if it's taking apart of belief systems, I need to take a look at it. I need to examine it. I'm not going to. What is insane to me, okay, is accepting what the priest or the politician or the advertising person tells me is true for decades. That's a form of insanity and brainwashing. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm not brainwashed, because maybe there's no escape from being a human being, but I want to try to have a direct personal experience with the world, with what is.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was one of the things I've been trying to educate myself on is reading James Joyce's Ulysses. And have you tried to read Ulysses?
I have a lot to say about that. I just finished in March. It took me months.
Oh, I'm like a quarter of the way through, and most of this pandemic has been with the dictionary, looking up words and
Irish idioms.
Yeah, but anyway, the Psalm 0 to me had this distinctly Ulyssian sort of feel, where you're getting an inside snapshot of somebody's inner world, and it's disjointed, it's scary, and it goes in all kinds of different places. And it's no wonder that this novel frightened people so much that it was banned for about a decade. And that is the feel that I get with Psalm 0. I think in a different era, this definitely would be banned in certain countries. I am quite certain that this would be like illicit literature. And this, what was that Spanish word of this?
Duende.
Duende. Okay, so to me, I'm not familiar with duende, but as in the mental health field, Carl Jung had this development of this idea of the shadow self.
Yes.
And that, to me, a lot of Psalm 0, a lot of your work is an exploration of the shadow self, of that which is frightening, which is beyond acceptable, which is dangerous, and which is part of us. And if we don't attend to it, it will get us at some point.
It's always a fine line, isn't it? It's always a fine line. It's an edge you walk out to, and you decide how far you're going to walk out. There are people that make slasher movies, cutting people's arms and heads off with chainsaws. Are they playing with the shadow self? I don't know. Do we need to see those images? I don't know. Do people need to see my images? Sometimes I have to ask myself that question. Do I need to go down this road? The cool thing about it is nobody can tell me. That's something I have to that's something I have to ask myself,
Yeah.
and figure out myself. And
Yeah.
for some reason, we're still going through priests, and we call them different names, and we line up our fences, and we make ourselves safe within the context of our tribes and everything like that. But
Right.
I want to address the Joyce thing also. If it's okay, I just want to drop back to that real quick.
JD, I meet so few people that have any knowledge of Joyce and his writings that, to me, this is like, coming across an oasis in a desert. So yes, please.
Well, I'm not a Joycean scholar at all.
Me neither.
But you know what? I don't care. It goes back to the same thing. There are all these experts and there are all these people, there are people who have gotten PhDs, double, triple PhDs on and written massive books on Joyce. Now, I don't want to read any of them. That's not totally true. But before I begin my process of my relationship with Joyce and whatever was dropping through him, I want to experience Bloom, okay, Stephen Dedalus, Molly. I want to experience these people in this world that this guy has created. And when I read Ulysses just recently, I wrote that song a while ago, but that world that he creates, oh boy, how can I say this? It feels like an alchemical experience. It really feels like, maybe because I want to believe that, but it feels like he takes your brain to a place where he gets you going and gets you swirling and gets you swirling and gets you swirling in this person's head, and then you're there. You're floating somewhere in the palm of either his hand or whatever's rolling through him. That's what it really feels like. And some of those passages open up into like these universal places that he goes, like toward the middle of the book. And it was so beautiful. I had to read it several times. I'm like, how is he doing this? How is this guy even smart enough as a human being to work on I can catch about 7 or 8 of the things he's doing. And there are probably 50 things that he's doing, and some of which he may not even know he's doing. That's my take on him.
Yeah.
And it's so dense for me that I had to just dedicate myself to 10 pages a day at certain points. I'll just read 10 pages.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy. Oh my God. And it's 900 pages or something,
It's long.
Not 700 pages.
I think it's 700 something.
700 something. Yeah.
Well, and his, in his religious imagery, which he loved toying with, and you love toying with religious imagery. And, one thing, as we've had conversations, I will often be blown away because you will at one point seem very dismissive of something, and then at another point reference like ancient wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes, as you did, in such a profound way that I'm inspired. Like, you found something, you've rediscovered something that for me I just let go because it just didn't make sense. And I love that. And to me, Joyce, he talks about, his mass is kind of the transmutation of everyday life experience into this beautiful experience. And, all the inner turmoil and whatnot, it's super cool. And I love to use hyperbole at times, but I really think you're getting at some of that essence of what Joyce does in your work in a modern way with modern video. And to me, it's so cool. I love it.
I sometimes wonder what he would do in our era, if he would be involved in film or not, and he did play the guitar, but to put myself in any category with him, I wouldn't do.
I know. I just wanted to see you squirm.
The guy, I can't even understand, like I said, how he did what he did, but it's not the point who's a genius or not.
No, I know.
But, I'm just, but I was making it a point, and I have to actually stop myself there and say, that's not even where I want to go.
No,
it's more like, what do we experience? And what we consider mundane can be full of life, full of animated life. Anima, spirit, animated. Everything has the potential to blow your mind if you just look at it, and see what's in it, see what's in the object. When I still go to church, and I'll sit in the back and I'll look out over the audience, and certain ministers of a certain age, they're still practicing ministers, will speak with the language of my youth, and I'll start weeping. I will just start weeping in the back row because of the language itself and the meaning it has for me. When they speak in this like King James version, eloquence. And some of those guys have been doing this, and women have been doing this for decades. You could call it a shtick, and maybe it is, but I don't know what isn't a shtick, to be honest. I mean, science to me is a shtick. So, we can use whatever shtick we want, but when you get at that thing that resonates with you, it's pure and it's real. And for me, that's all I have to know.
Yeah.
And maybe I run it through my filter of my experience now and the books I've read and the paths I've gone down. But to give up on that experience, sitting in the back row of the church, absorbing what this person is sharing, I don't want to give that up. Yeah. I want to experience that, and I'll go back. Yeah. Because it can happen anywhere. It can happen with the hippies down here, in the desert, and they'll be ringing a bowl, but the hippies will think, well, not those filthy Christians in that building, and then the Christians will be like, those dirty little hippie pagans, and it's just like, shit, man, to me, it's the same thing.
And you're just embracing it all.
Well, I mean, I feel like you do that too. I feel like you have a curiosity to want to go there with what you read, with what you experience. I'm even curious about how you go there with your patients, if some of them are from religious backgrounds and working their way through things that you have to process with them.
Well, and it's interesting. You started off talking about how many of the people who really dive into your work are in the mental health profession. Mm-hmm. And one of the profound privileges that I have is being able to see inside people's lives. And I've found that the, kind of population that I enjoy working with best, which is what I'm doing right now, are those people that are on, public assistance, who have kind of maximized life problems. Mm. And maybe they just came out of jail, or they're really deep into methamphetamine addiction, lots of loss and trauma. And to me, these people are, all the conventions have been stripped away. And I sometimes am the only person that listens to them, because, we often only listen to people like you talk about, the priests who have the robes, who have the symbols that I am worthy of listening to, that I have been trained to give you the proper feeding at the right times and whatnot. And, these people have all that stripped away. And so often, nobody listens to them. And yet their stories are the best stories ever. Mm. And sometimes just acknowledging like that is such an amazing story is profound for them.
Yes.
And, so let's go back to this idea of resonance. So you mentioned Ulysses, and to me, I think the comparison is just the resonance. And then another author, Franz Kafka, when I read The Trial, has a similar sort of like dreamlike resonance that I get into with Psalm 0.
Yes.
The other things that you
Yes. I mean, to me, the dream state, the liminal state, is often the most appealing place to be. It's potent. It's like vanilla extract. It's just like, you can't, whoa, don't drink the whole little, don't shoot the bottle. But being in that place is often preferable. And sometimes I wonder if we can't create that all the time. So when I created Psalm 0, it just felt like I was able to go into this world, and I found that the one actor, I'm not even sure if he was a professional actor, the guy in the white outfit, know, and then I ran into the woman with the black rabbit, and then my friend Clarence had his two kids that were just at a precious age, and we found this beautiful place to shoot out by the river, out by the levee, and there were vineyards out there, and it's just like you experience this dream, and you get to experience it multiple times when you write the song. You get to experience it again when you create the world in editing, and it's a fun place to live. And then in preparation for our conversation, you know, it's like I get to live in it again to think
Yeah.
about. I hadn't watched it in a while.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I think the conventional worlds that we sometimes create are in that dream space, but it's more like a nightmare.
That's a fair way to put it, I think, at times. I mean, a lot of the world, the nightmare world that is foisted upon us, shall we say, creates a lot of anxiety and fear that isn't necessarily leading towards introspection and creating a place where light can exist. It's
Yeah.
it's in the the assumption that the material world in will somehow fill the void if you get enough to put in there, you know, and we're bombarded with that, and we buy into that dream, we buy
Yeah.
into it for whatever reason, and it's so powerful. It's just, it's overwhelming, and it takes a lot of effort to try to step out of that world and to experience whatever you will experience with life, and to even talk about it is um kind of foolish in a way.
Yeah. It's not it.
No, yeah, I mean, what does it say? He who talks about the Tao does not understand the Tao.
Right.
You know.
I want to go back to your friend who is spending time with Chopin, because to me it ties into a really cool experience that my family and I had that gets into like the entry point into this dreamlike state. So it was a couple years ago, and we'd gone on this really cool journey through Europe, and the last stop was Warsaw. And there's this Chopin museum because that's Chopin's place of birth, although, you know, he spent a lot of time in Paris, which is kind of where he did a lot of his stuff. But the people of Warsaw celebrate Chopin as they should. And in the summer, there's this beautiful garden. I wish I could remember the name. It's huge. It's gorgeous. Mm-hmm. And I think twice a day, someone does a free open air concert where, by memory, they play Chopin for 1 hour, which to me is a feat in itself. And so we happened upon this concert. We probably planned to be there, but it felt like we just kind of happened upon it. And, you know, my kids are full of energy, and it's hard to keep their attention.
Right.
And I was like, okay, we'll be here for 2 or 3 minutes. You know, we're going to kind of glimpse what's happening. But it was the most amazing thing, because they started doing really simple things in the dust with sticks and the little pebbles. And they didn't poke at each other, and they didn't say, when are we going to go? And we just were all in this like magical place where we didn't have to go anywhere. There wasn't any need to go anywhere else. And it lasted for a long time. And that was just like profound, because that's not how things usually are. And to me, there's something about either yourself having done something important repetitively, like learning a great piece of music, or being in the presence of someone who has spent a lot of time doing that, that can kind of draw you in and let you be a part of this like feast of the in-between space, or whatever you want to call it.
That's amazing. I mean, I could see it all in my mind. I could see your kids with these little sticks just making these little images or designs as the music is wafting over the park. That is that's so profound, because kids have so much energy, and for a kid to drop into that space means, you're right, somebody there had presence, had some deep, profound presence. And there's something about music that carries us away. You know, it takes us to a place that nothing else does. It's vibration. It's vibrating with our hearts, maybe, you know, with our minds.
Yeah.
And it's mesmerizing. It's dreamlike. Chopin feels like a dream, you know. I mean, you just get taken away. It's so sad. It aches, and it hurts. It hurts so good. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes I just put it on because there's nothing else that will do. Just a piano, you know.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that will suffice, that will cure what hurts, you know.
Yeah.
Or it feels like you're having a relationship with that. And when I think about that that's that space that we drop into, um, man, it's it's sacred. It's like, there should be a spot for that. You know, the Sabbath, the Judaic Sabbath that's been adopted by other religions, um, gives us a place in which to abide in that. We set it aside in a sense. In a sense, it's a conservative box that we create,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's amazing to be able to, as a human being, create meaning out of thin air. You know, that's what we're doing. And there's nothing untrue about that. You know, I mean, nihilists or materialists, or, you know, maybe material scientists, they're going to tell us that, you know, I don't know, in a sense, maybe it's all BS, maybe, you know, but it isn't to me.
Yeah.
We have the opportunity. It's maybe our most profound gift to be, in a sense, God. You know, whenever I'm creating a video, for instance, I'm creating this world out of thin air. It's an existential trip to think that you can create something out of thin air.
Yeah.
You don't know where it comes from. You don't know where it's going, and what it's going to do in Darin's brain or whoever else. And the more I do it, the more I just trust that the process is enough. Is the process of this puts me in a place of reverence, you
Yeah.
know, and I like being there.
You know, I really like that you reference the process, because one of the things that I've been trying to do in being a less angry person, because that's something that I struggle with, is having a lot of rage and anger kind of under the surface, because so much of my life has been built around outcomes, like let's get the right outcome. But I really think that the best place to live in life is to let go of outcomes, which we don't really have control over anyway, and really focus on process. Like, how are we going to do this journey, regardless of where it's going? And with that, I think a lot of the anger just evaporates, because the anger is often about trying to control things that are way beyond our control.
Mm, mm. Forgiveness is a process. I think I've gone through phases where I think that I've forgiven someone. I think that I've let go, and then I'll spend some time alone in silence, and these thoughts come up that are like ragey and dark and you know, even sinister, maybe, you know, about the things that I would say. God, if I was just back there, you know, and and maybe even raged, you know, about certain things that I was raised, or this and that and the other. You know, I mean, how many years can we blame our mothers? You know, and I don't know that I fully have an answer for that, because it's still occurring in my life, you
Yeah.
know, and I can't control when even it's going to come up. Sometimes it feels like, you know, but I do know this: my intent is to release it. My intent is to surrender it, and my intent is to let it go.
Yeah.
And my intent is to just love the person despite myself.
That's
You know,
beautiful.
and it's a process.
Yeah.
I have to continually say that sometimes, and then other times I'll be in this state where, uh, you know, the rage comes back, and I have to, and then, you know, maybe it's because I had the wrong tea that morning, or I didn't sleep. Often for me, it has to do with sleep.
Oh yeah, I'm a monster if I haven't had enough sleep.
Oh yeah, yeah. So have you come up with tools for you with anger, and how you work through it?
Oh man, that's a great question. You know, we reconnected. You and I reconnected partly because I decided to dive into Facebook. And, you know, Facebook brings up all kinds of strong feelings from people. But one of my high school classmates died of a heart attack. He's my age.
Mm,
And I was like, I've been living under this fantasy that there's more time,
mm,
and that someday, you know, we'll all have a reunion and we'll talk about the journey and all of that.
mm,
And I was like, you know what? There's a lot of people from my past that I think about all the time, I care deeply about, and I never talk to. So what I've done with Facebook is I've done a lot of reaching out and say, let's talk on the telephone, because I love the telephone. I love, kind of real-time communication.
Mm.
And what's happened from that is that there's a few individuals where it's not a one-time conversation, and we're talking about like all the wrong turns that life has taken. And it's been really awesome. It's almost that like Martin Buber kind of that relational space that just helps me feel connected in a very deep way, because many of these people are people that knew me very early on in my life. They didn't know me with any titles. They knew me with all the anxieties of what am I going to become and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the psychiatrist, so I'm often helping people. But to me, when you really connect with people kind of on a shared plane where you're not helping them and they're not helping you, but there's help, there's compassion, there's release, there's humor, that to me is where I've been finding tremendous relief from the kind of angst of life of what's this all about?
It's amazing what we do for each other. I had a rattlesnake right out here on my porch about 2 years ago. My cousin was over, and I actually try to relocate rattlesnakes. Some people think that's a joke or whatever, and they would just off it. But that one we couldn't save. It was in a tight spot, and it started striking at us. And then it struck at me one time. I forget the image. It came up between the glass wall and this box I was standing on, and I could see the underside of it. I mean, it was like the Garden of Eden reinvented as the Garden of Darkness. and I jumped back and I fell on this teak bench and I cracked my rib, and it hurt so bad. And I had cracked ribs for months. And then this is pre-COVID. And then from time to time, a friend would come over and we'd just hang out, and my whole rib cage would feel better after they left. Like
That's profound.
Like they mended me. We mended me in the conversation. And I do think we heal each other. And I'm not even sure we've touched the tip of the iceberg on the body's ability to heal itself through different means. One of those being relationships and sharing with brothers or sisters that you feel like you're understood. I do like to kind of like relinquish tribes, and like, I don't know, I don't feel like maybe I have one, but that's not totally true, because we're having a tribal experience right now through this conversation. And sometimes I wish that it was a larger context, like the context of my youth. But there are ways to reinvent that still allow the same feeling to happen, and to heal each other. And that's so interesting that you talk about that in terms of healing anger and healing emotions just through some sort of resonant conversation that maybe isn't even about a specific incident. I don't know. I don't know how that all works. I do know that I see a counselor once a month. And this last time I saw her, it's like at the end of the conversation, what I thought were incidentals in the last 10 minutes, all of a sudden I started weeping. I had this kind of breakdown, and it's like all of this stuff bubbled up because of her being there and the relationship we built. And I felt better since then in one conversation. I mean, to me, what you do, what counselors do, you are the priests of the new age.
Yeah.
You've taken the mantle, and
I profoundly feel that.
Do you? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I previously was working in an inpatient psychiatric unit, and I often would see myself as kind of this secular priest who was administering to people that had kind of run to the temple for protection from all that life was throwing at them that was overwhelming. And You know, and modern life, I mean, the whole field of psychology and psychiatry kind of emerged at a time when the world was in a fast clip of moving from agrarian to industrial, and you know, things were changing very rapidly.
Throw Nietzsche in the mix.
He's right there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because then God is dead, and you've got that. So
right.
Who do I confess to now? Where's my confessional
right.
booth? If God's dead, where's my confessional?
Right. You know, and to me, that I do want to get back to some of the really amazing imagery in Psalm 0, because the most repeated phrase in this song is, and I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in God. And it makes me think of Shakespeare, thou doth protest too much. And that there is this wonderful silhouetted image of someone from their back, and they're pure white, and there's this dark black inky image that eventually kind of slips off the screen, and it's just this intensely luminous silhouetted image. And you also reference the Jewish I am that I am, getting at this idea that when we let go of God out there, God far away, but we embrace life, we find that it's super close. To me, that's what I was getting out of that. But I want to hear from you, like that's what those beautiful. Images mean to you.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful, and that's true, and it's all true. And somebody else, like I said before, whatever the experience is what it should be, and because it harkens back to this idea of direct personal experience. And I hesitate sometimes to offer my tainted perspective on what I do, because I don't want to interfere with your experience. I want it to be your experience, and I don't want to be the kind of priest that feels that you have to come through me to go to it. You know, that's the way it used to be. They didn't allow people to read the scriptures. You have to have the priest read it to you. But I will say that was filmed at the Tufa Towers near Mono Lake, that image. That's just me with the camera out walking toward the water in the Tufa Towers, and then the negative is edited in. And that black inky thing that you're talking about is something that happened in editing that occurred on the screen. I had no control over it. That is, to me, when the magic happens, and it happens from time to time. In my little machine here that I work on, I don't know how that happens, but I do feel that maybe either I'm controlling it or something. I don't know. It's just bizarre when those things happen, and they seem to make sense on an emotional or something deeper than emotion level. And then that, you know, the black rabbit that's in there, it's also kind of harkens back to that inky thing. And, you know, there's a line there that also says, I do not believe, I don't believe anymore. So you're taking all of this deconstruction, and you're deconstructing it again. Because at a certain point, language doesn't suffice in these areas. In fact, it can distract. But we do what we can. We do what we can. But I will say that at Mono Lake there, I had a wonderful experience. And I laid down beside the water, and there was a guy in a kayak paddling out in the water. And as I laid down there, for some reason, I don't know what it was, but it felt like he was paddling right next to my ear. I could hear every little drip of water. And then I stayed there until the sun went down, and I just stayed on the beach, and I saw this light over the horizon. I thought, wow, there's a city over there. And I just kept hanging out. And all of a sudden, and I wasn't planning this, the full moon came up in all its glory right over Mono Lake. Just this giant orange orb right over the top of the mountain, the little rise. And so somehow all of that was working on whatever happens.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. There's a number of times when I will talk with patients and they will describe a what I would consider a mystical experience where there's no believing involved because it was so profound. It was an experience. They can't deny it. They can't talk to anybody about it, but it's not part of their belief system. It's beyond that. It was certainty, absolute certainty in something profound. I mean, once again, they can't put their words on it. Something life-changing,
Yeah.
Something incredibly beautiful, something incredibly close. And, to me, as I listen to this kind of repetition, and I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in war, and I don't believe in peace. And, in a way, like all this stuff is falling apart. And then bizarre images, boom, children exploring, children playing. And to me, that was like a roller coaster experience, where you're like click, 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 click. And then whoosh, we're floating, we're flying. And that this is like, there's life, there's exploration, and it's all couched in the context of finitude and that it's going to end and it's going to evaporate. And so pay attention. Don't let it slip by mindlessly. To me, that was like really cool.
I think a lot of all of it has to do with innocence. Um, the great mystic Jesus Christ is quoted as saying, "Lest you become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." And the same mystic is also quoted as saying, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." And what is it about children that takes us to places? Even seeing them playing in the garden, just seeing them and experiencing them, and not thinking about what they're doing, watching them kind of play. Sometimes we get swept away into their world, and we remember. I was down by the creek with my nephews when they were still quite young, and we were sitting there and we were laughing, and I was telling the most stupid jokes. Like, nobody would laugh at these jokes except for 8, 10-year-old kids. And they were laughing, and for like 5 seconds, all of a sudden, I remembered what it was like to be in third grade and to laugh at those kind of jokes. And it was so funny.
Yeah.
Like, it was so amusing. And over time, our experience becomes deeper and more profound in one level with all of the books we read and all of the knowledge that we accumulate. And then at the same time, our experience becomes more and more intellectual, and that can take away from this child in the garden, these children in the garden. And
Yeah.
So when you were describing what you experienced there, to be honest, it pleases me greatly, because you got taken to the place that it felt like I got taken to, or at least something similar. When I heard the music, when I heard the sounds, when I was with the cinematographer and we were capturing that image, it's just, and then, some of the trees that are filmed at the end were shot in Northern California up in the mountains, and with the sun coming through, and it was creating this weird halo with a rainbow around it. And it's just, and then that gentleman with the white thing, he's so evocative to me of something unique, the way he closes his eyes so slowly.
Yeah.
It's a passing away. I mean, when you take things away from yourself, it feels like death. When you strip yourself of all of your belief systems, it feels like dying. And when your psyche gets stripped clean of the beliefs that were essential to your very core of meaning, it's not easy.
When I compare it to, I do a lot of work. One of my favorite things to do is help people recover from trauma.
Mm,
And I think that to have your meaning making world deconstructed
mm,
is very traumatic
mm,
and disorienting, and requires people to be there with us so
mm.
that we don't get destroyed by that.
It's it's no joke, even though there needs to be jokes around it, because
Yeah.
humor can add a lot of levity to. I mean, I had a professor in college, a theology professor. I was studying theology in college. I have a degree in that, and I had this professor in the Gospels. I had him. I took Greek from him. I mean, smart guy, dropped down a lot of information. But my senior year, I started to have a kind of a lot of questions. And so I went in, and he's the head of the department, and I sat there and I spoke with him. And he listened just quietly with this just, quiet, serene demeanor. And it felt like he was a man that spent a lot of time in prayer or something like that. And he said, well, they called me John back then. He said, well, John, um, a lot of philosophers go to the edge and jump off. And he said, sometimes it's not a bad idea to go take a walk. And that was probably worth all of the tuition fees.
Wow.
And that was as much of a lesson as all of the classes I took from this guy,
Yeah.
because it gave me a practical way to deal with the heaviness of existential angst. Go for a walk.
Yeah.
And that's been a salvation for me. If I go hang out with the trees and the rocks and the air, and you can keep diving in if you want to, but you can also dive into something else for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels like it's a balance, kind of balances out the shadow side, the shadow work.
And I think there was a time in history where, people going on this walk or jumping off the philosophical cliff were, a fairly small percentage of the population, people that, really were driven towards um, philosophical perspectives. But I think because, especially with the advent of the smartphone, that we can have the world's knowledge in our hand, my kids have the world's knowledge in their hand and are, rapidly consuming it, that we can't help but have everything that has been built up around us challenged. And it's probably part of, how things are evolving to challenge the structures. And yet, one of the things that, as a parent is very frightening is I love the saying, it's like we're on a roller coaster that's being constructed as we ride. And we're not quite sure if all the rails are going to get put in place.
Yeah.
And there's no getting off,
Hmm.
because, we're not in a time where, there's a church in the valley and there's no communication other than that one day a week where you come together at the tolling of the bell and the priest tells you what to think. And, sometimes I long for those times.
Yes.
Where it's just simple and you go plow the field and you eat dinner and you do exactly what your father did and what his father did and what his father did. Because to not know any better, I don't know, sounds like a pretty good life. But
Yeah.
we're not there anymore.
Well, I mean, Lao Tzu might disagree.
Ah.
Yeah. I believe that Lao Tzu's idea is eternal. It's been there a long, long time. And I have this type of idea that the most profound mystical experiences are high technology. The highest level of technology that humans can produce is in the mystic mind. I may be biased to that, of course, but I don't want to go into woo-wooville too deeply. But because I kind of feel that everything I think might just be an illusion. And everything Lao Tzu was thinking might just be an illusion. But what illusion do I want to be a part of? And so when I read Lao Tzu, and then I think about the cares of my life, I can enter this space of grace, which is what the Christians would call it, which is what the great prophet from the Christian traditions, the mystic Jesus Christ, would say: do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you drink. Do not worry about your body. Look at the lilies of the field. And, you know, it's so beautiful at St. John of the Cross, when he writes that poem, at the end of the poem, I think I actually have a copy of it here. I remained lost in oblivion. My face I reclined on the beloved. All ceased, and I abandoned myself, leaving my cares forgotten among the lilies. And that, in order to really believe that, I feel like we have to come to terms with death. We have to rest in death.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, at some point or other, we get to experience the reality of death, sometimes right in our face. Your brother, Kenny, our dear brother, Kenny, I call him my brother too, because he felt that way to me. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And my father, you know, died right in front of my face with my hand on his arm, you know. And when you come face to face with it, you know, you can go a lot of different directions. And probably we'll be processing this for the rest of our lives. What you experienced with Kenny, what I experienced with my father, and now, you know, your father is not well, you know, and you're having to probably take a look at it again, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do with that? How do we abide with this non-existence?
You know, it's interesting that one of my favorite psychiatric authors is Irvin Yalom. And he spent most of his career at Stanford. He's in his upper 80s now, but has come at everything from an existential perspective. And one of my favorite books, it's dense, it's not like pleasurable reading, although he writes super well, so on some level it is, but it's the textbook Existential Psychotherapy. And after my brother jumped off of the 900-foot cliff, which, if you've got to go, that's kind of cool.
Wild.
Yeah, he was a wild man.
When I think about Kenny, you know, he seemed to be unlike any of us.
Yeah.
I mean, he was wild in a certain side, and I don't know if you're comfortable with me talking about this.
Oh, absolutely. I love talking about Kenny.
Okay, but as I understand it, when they found his body, the bears had eaten part
all but like 30 pounds of him. He's a bear now.
When I think about that, I can't think of a better way for Kenny to sacrifice his flesh to the earth.
Yeah.
He was like a bear. He was just so strong. You know, he almost set a world record. You know, when I think about him, I think, well, he was essentially a professional athlete.
Mm-hmm.
He went from, on the Pacific Coast Trail, he went from, where did he start? Mexico,
mm-hmm.
to Canada, came back and turned around and was like 300 miles or less to the border.
Yeah, they got snowed in the Mammoth area, but otherwise, yeah, they would have done this, what they call yo-yo, up and back in one season.
And he would have been like the first person to do that.
Right. And later on, his friend, Scott Williamson, did complete that quest, because they hiked together.
Right.
And Scott got a write up in, I think, Backpacker or one of those magazines. But no, he was incredible. But, you know, like the Zoroastrians had this animal burial.
Yes.
He had an animal burial.
Oh God, I've never put it in the context of Zoroastrians, but yeah, when they used to just put the bodies on the altar and the vultures would come down and eat the flesh.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a great book that I highly recommend for people that are just interested in death and dying, which I've always been fascinated with. It's by Caitlin Doherty. It's called From Here to Eternity. Caitlin lives in the Los Angeles area, runs a mortuary, and she's a huge advocate of kind of alternative options for death. And her book just explores death rituals around the world, and it's super well written and lots of fun. But that's where I got that term, kind of animal burial, from that book. And I put some significance to it with Kenny, because there he is.
Back into the system, back into, yeah.
But when he died, I got this textbook out, Existential Psychotherapy, and it was incredibly profound. And I've been rereading it now, um, and I'm in the last section. So it has a section on death, which is the biggest part of it, a section on isolation,
Mm.
kind of going through all the existential sort of issues, a chapter on freedom, and you talk about not having priests, and that is one of the reasons we as human beings want priests. We want people of authority, because otherwise it feels like nobody's in charge, and that's terrifying.
Well,
because,
that's a great point.
Yeah. And then the last chapter, which I've been finding so profound, is on meaninglessness, and all the ways that we go about trying to create meaning. And they quoted Ludwig Wittgenstein. Is that his name?
Wittgenstein, I think. Yeah.
Something. Obviously not a great philosophical scholar. But his perspective was that when you dive into life, fully embrace life, fully live life, then questions of meaning kind of just go away. And that's the ultimate solution to, how to deal with questions of meaning. Because if you just think of it philosophically, it gnaws at you and starts eroding your motivation, your ability to connect. And, to me, one of the calls of, watching you live and watching your music and your art is just a full diving in, not avoiding, sitting in the back of the traditional church, hanging out with the people who like living outside of societal conventions, talking, connecting, and just being in it, enjoying it.
It goes back to process, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yesterday I was working on several things, and I just kind of was going with it, and I wasn't judging it as much as I sometimes do. And at the end of the day, it felt like like I'd experienced some sort of a beautiful dream, and I was just absorbed in what I was doing. And sometimes I get bogged down in what's going to happen with the things I create. What I got to get it out there. I got to, I've got to succeed, and there's this urge to succeed in the parameters within what I've been told is success. And sometimes I wonder what is driving me, what is driving all of us to do what we do? Is it, what are we chasing? What are we really chasing? And I don't, nobody can really answer that for you. I don't think they should anyway. I think that that's something that if you kind of can come to some answer inside yourself that's satisfying, at least for me, it can be a relief. You can take a breath of air, let it go. And for me, one conclusion that I've come to is that if I can be absorbed in the process, I enter the Zen state, or whatever it's called, and that's enough. That in itself is enough. When I work with people on these projects and videos, I see somebody and they excite me. They turn me on in whatever way, and I want to work with them. And I'll ask them, and oftentimes they'll say yes, luckily. And they'll come and work on the project with me, and we'll have this experience together, this catharsis, this being absorbed in whatever it is. And so that's art. Art happens all along the way. And I don't even sometimes like to use the word art. It's just this experience that we have, because when you do that and you use the word art, you take a lot of people out of the ball game, and that's unfortunate. I'm not an artist, so I think it's important that everybody knows they can absorb and be part of whatever their process is. I mean, there are mathematicians and accountants that get swept into mystical areas because philosophy and mathematics are closely linked. You can get absorbed in whatever it is and lost, and it can become an art form. It's a way of seeing the world, I think.
Yeah.
And to loop it back to death a little bit, I think Psalm 0 does have a lot to do with taking a look at that, because one of the lines toward the end is, and beyond all common sense, you will prey upon my flesh, and I will disappear again into that great abyss. And that's heavy duty, and as accepting as I think I might be of death, when my father died in front of me, that was the most intense moment of my life so far. To see life slipping away right in front of you, somebody that carries so much weight in so many ways disappearing. There's nothing wrong with grieving after that, or through that, falling on your knees and just feeling absolutely helpless and powerless in the arms of whatever it is. And even if it's total blackness, and nothing.
A book that really profoundly changed the way that I view death was Ernest Becker's book called Denial of Death. And it's a complex book in a way. He was coming at it from a psychological perspective. He was referencing a psychoanalyst, Otto Frank, whose translated works was very difficult to read. But one thing that really I started to really think was probably true, and I started looking for it in my own life wherever I could, which was that one of the most basic motivations for humans is the denial of death. And that how we behave, structures that we create, are often in a way trying to distance ourselves from death and to help us forget that that's coming. And that, like Soren Kierkegaard challenged us to do, not to escape the angst, but to just go into it, go through it. And that's where, salvation, if you want to think of it in kind of a Christian term, comes from, is going right into the heart of the darkness. And, that I think, you had talked at the beginning, sometimes you question, like, should we examine all these shadows? What's the role of that? And I really think that making friends with the shadow, at least acknowledging its presence, learning from it, really is the direction of salvation from disconnection, from being, driven by impulses that are not intentional, and coming into a place that is very relational, that has the opportunity of something that can't exist unless there's two who are deeply engaged in a caring fashion. And that's a pretty cool thing. To me, that's where the heaven on earth sort of comes into play. The kingdom of God is at hand, is right there.
It's strange to think of the kingdom of God as death and as a relationship, but I like it. I think I think it's beautiful in a sense. There's something perhaps comforting about being absorbed into that abyss after a life full of challenges and grief and joy and loss. It feels like with my dad, things were taken away from him a little bit at a time. And when that happens, the cup is empty. And because it's empty, other things are allowed to be poured into it that don't seem as relevant at other times if your cup is full. When I would make him a meal, and I'd give my mom a break once in a while when I caregave for him, he couldn't speak as much anymore, but he would look at me and his eyes told me everything. And we hadn't done that 10 years prior, 5 years prior. He would just look at me because that's what he could do. And there was compassion, there was gratefulness, there was a father looking at a son in a way that maybe a father doesn't always look at a son. because of this opportunity of death coming down the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of a, okay, so let me ask you this. Do you grieve? How do you grieve?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like lately, especially, I am in a state of like low grade grieving
Mm.
as I go through my day. Sometimes I even foster it. Like I want to go there. So I'll turn on Samuel Barber's Adagio, the supposedly saddest song in the world, 10 minutes of just grief, and just feel a sense of loss for, I mean, so many things. I mean, this year of pandemic and, um, whatever will happen with my dad. And so to me, grieving is all about remembering. And I think, one thing I do in my clinical practice is I talk about how the goal of grieving is to be able to be reminded of, to talk about, to remember those things that evoke powerful emotions without it being so completely overwhelming that you can't go there.
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
so grieving to me is like learning a section of Chopin.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming back to it over and over again and trying to learn something from it.
Mm.
Trying to just be kind of still and not avoid it, like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like that whole concept that we create worlds to deny death and avoid death, but to just kind of bring it right in front of us and live with it. But also, then I have kids and they're full of life.
Mm.
And so to me, grieving and loss reminds me that, this moment when they're fighting and they won't get off their screens. And I don't like that because I'm from a different era that didn't know what to do with screens. That I'm reminded that this is fleeting and that I need to just embrace it deeply, because I don't want to be that person that regrets
Mm-hmm.
and says, I missed it.
When I lived in Hawaii, I was teaching there, and I lived on campus where I was teaching, and I'd occasionally have friends up onto the lanai, and we could just see the ocean toward Waikiki and all those beaches, Bowls and Magic Island and all that, and I sat there, and I would just, whoever I was with, I'd be like, "Wow, this is special. This is." I would do that often because I knew that I probably wouldn't be there forever. That it was kind of just a part of my life that was this little bubble, and I felt like that worked out pretty well, because whenever I think about Hawaii, I feel like I took enough of those moments for me to feel like I didn't miss it. I was there.
Yeah.
I was there, and there are other times in my life when I've been expectant of the future so much that maybe I missed out on this whole process of, even crying by the toilet bowl in Los Angeles after you miss an audition or something,
Mm-hmm.
weeping because you think life is passing you by and you've missed opportunities. That in itself is a dramatic moment that's bizarrely beautiful if you let it be.
Yeah.
A grown man weeping beside a toilet bowl, and God only knows what my head was resting on at the time.
They say that the Greek gods, being immortal, envied humans because we were mortal and that we could experience endings. And sometimes on my most difficult days, where like you're describing, where you're gut punched and you just think, this is just devastating.
Yeah.
I just think, if I was an immortal god and I had an opportunity to come down and live this one awful day and then die, would I do it? And the answer is always yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to me, that's part of the invitation, is to say, And I am borrowing words from other people, but to say yes to what is, to say yes
Mm-hmm.
to life, and life is what is, no matter what it is. And that to me is where, you know, it starts to become really exciting.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the theater of the absurd. The curtain comes up, the actors come out on stage, and really bizarre, sometimes horrific things happen. And you're like, okay, today was the theater of the absurd. Sometimes it's a comedy, sometimes it's a drama, but we're always there. We're always
Oh,
in it.
oh man, yeah. I'll go outside in the morning after my rituals, and I'll sit there, and I'm kind of blessed because I look at a little mountain canyon when I wake up. I mean, I feel blessed. Maybe it would freak the hell out of some people because they'd feel more comfortable with their neighbor next door. But I there's a line in this song called "The King of Carrot Flowers," and it goes, "How strange it is to be anything at all." Jeff Mangum wrote the lyrics for that, and um, it's trippy to be here. Nobody really knows how we got here. There's theories, there's ideas. Some people say we were on the back of a turtle that got you know cracked open, and other people say there's a big bang that happened, and they both are metaphors for whatever the hell it is.
Right.
And we're on the ride. And to me, the question is often, is the ride loving? you know and the weird thing about it is that I wonder if it's possible that we can decide if the ride is loving or not, and therefore have it be true.
Right.
And if you look at things at the quantum level and what they're coming up with in terms of like the electrons existing on an orbital, they say that they exist sometimes because we see them there, and they only are there because we see them. Well, if that's true, then we're all kind of like creators, and we're all possibly creating some reality out of what's going down day to day. Uh, who knows, really?
Yeah.
But like in Psalm 0, it's like, you will prey upon my flesh. Beyond all common sense, you will prey upon my flesh. But I also feel, I don't want to bias the lyric here, but I feel in some way that I'm being held in this space that we're in a way that I want to believe is constructed of love, is built of loving arms, and um, and sometimes I feel that that's the only thing I can do is create that belief. Because at times when you have knee surgery or something like that, if you're a materialist, maybe it's easier to deal with it. If you believe there's something else going on, maybe you have to work at it a little harder if you want to believe that. I don't know. But if you're Lao Tzu, you just say it is what it is, and I drop into it. And I don't try to intellectualize it.
Right.
But he seemed to have a way of talking about the Tao that is beyond emotion almost, but doesn't deny emotion either. Because to deny emotion is to deny a facet of humanity that is beautiful. I mean, the Christians tend to dive into the bloody Jesus. It's very emotional. I dig that part of it. I mean, Jesus on the cross, man, that's heavy duty. Blood dripping down. Go to Spain, man. Oh my God, there's so many bloody Jesuses. And
Yeah.
and then you see the Lao Tzu and the sitting. I wake up every morning and there's a Buddha on my little dresser, and he's sitting there and he's turquoise, and it's just, when I look over in the morning, it's so serene. So, sometimes it's fun to be part of the movie where the Buddha takes the lead role, and other times the bloody Jesus on the cross is there, and you're like, well, what's it going to be today?
Right. And to me, one of the missed aspects, the often missed aspects of Christianity is that God dies.
Mm. Mm.
And a philosopher that I've enjoyed is Pete Rollins. He's Irish, and he's written books like The Idolatry of God, The Divine Magician, and it just explores these different perspectives on it. They're wonderful reads. In a way, they're kind of in that same resonance as Psalm 0 and Ulysses and Kafka and things like that. But
yeah, well, to be thrown into that mix is frightening to me, but I'm glad to be there.
So I want to wrap this up
Mm-hmm.
because I'm going to go make some pancakes for my family soon. But
Sounds
I want to share an image that I can't not see looking at you.
good. Okay.
And to me, it is a very meaningful image to me in that both my kids were adopted from Russia.
Mm.
I've traveled to St. Petersburg and to Moscow many times. And the image is of you as a Russian Orthodox priest. And with your Russian heritage, I just can't not see that. And to me, it's a wonderful image. Some of the most profound religious, like institutionalized religion sort of experiences have been in Russia, in Russian Orthodox services,
Mm.
and led out by long bearded men in certain robes, um, and I don't know what it's probably just that it's foreign, that none of those uh, traditions were mine from the beginning, and so they jolt me
Mm.
a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but to me, here's what I love about what you do is that, I mean, you explore to the ends of the known universe, but you're also deeply rooted in tradition. And I think your beard, to me, speaks to that. And you come back to ancient texts, you come back to ancient symbols, and one of the things that for me was really profound with Psalm 0 is that it was almost like you singing was a Gregorian chant, a monastic sort of um, exercise
Mm-hmm.
that just ties in deeply over these hundreds of years to a place where if we were to transport one of those ancient monks and say, hey, we want you to watch this video, Psalm 0, I don't think they could handle it. They'd explode. but we have gone on this journey. There's all this history, and we're exploring, and we can't help but explore, and yet you have a foot in the past and you have a foot in the present, and I love that.
Well, it's in our blood. Our DNA is in our blood, and I wonder how that manifests. It obviously does in all kinds of ways, in genetic advantages and disadvantages, possibly in things from in my past, in particular from Russia. I mean, my parents are both Russian, and they married within this Russian tradition, religious tradition, and all of the men in that tradition grew long beards. And I've been to those church services. I've been to funerals and weddings. My parents were married in one of those services. I've been to my grandparents' funerals in that church, and it's been that way for hundreds of years. And so that has to be living in me somehow, even though I was born in the States, and I know a few Russian words, and my parents speak the language, but unfortunately they didn't teach me. But so there's a resonance with it there, and I'm so pleased that you went there, and I really want to go and experience that part of my heritage in those places. My mother just drew the church of a Russian church in Kizzy, and she was actually painting this painting when I was in her womb, and um, and then there was a fire in the house, and it got destroyed when I was about 10 months old, and she just repainted that a few months ago, the Church of Kizzy, in a new interpretation, and it was so beautiful to see that there. And so it's also interesting to think about what's influencing you in your mother's womb, and how that what she's thinking and processing in her DNA is transferring to you. First of all, she was painting, and and also first of all, she was painting a church, and so you know I don't know. It's in there, but it's in there in a peculiar way, because the first line of the of the song, you know, is erotic, you know, and bizarre in terms of that kind of a context, but not if you look at it in terms of Teresa of Avila or Saint John of the Cross, who embraced whatever it is, the great nada, in erotic terms, oftentimes. So if that's what I'm doing, I feel excused.
Oh man, I love it.
Yeah. So
JD, this has been such an honor. I really appreciate being able to kind of come alongside you for a brief moment and just kind of explore. Um, it's like a converging of streams that kind of went in different directions. You know,
yeah,
we go way back,
right.
and
Yeah,
our lives have had different paths, but for a
yeah,
moment we get to kind of
yeah.
sit beside the river together and reminisce. And
Very, very brotherly.
yeah,
And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you taking the time to sink in like this. I have every intent that that's what will happen when people watch, and when I'm competing with images of cats and breakfast cereal, I'm not sure it always happens. And so I really appreciate you just taking the time to absorb, and you know, for just being who you are. I think there's just some sort of innate fascination that has taken you on this journey in life, that has uh, that has had you pursue certain avenues professionally, but also has had you pursue the books that you've read, that not every psychiatrist would read. You know, you've read certain material that is digging at something.
mm-hmm.
and so I appreciate that about you, and again, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, this has been awesome. Thanks.
Let's do it again.
All right, absolutely.
Have a beautiful day over there.
All right, we will.
Aloha.
Aloha.